that. TDLR, victim-centered trauma-informed interviewing, and the OAG's office, HT investigations for law enforcement, a 3-part series of search warrants, and HT investigations prosecuting HT cases. Okay, safeguard victims' rights and access to resources. Texas DPS, victim services counselors receive training on new laws regarding bond conditions, protective orders, and the protective order registry through the Office of Court Administration. Victim services counselors provide safety planning, offer the victim information notification every day, explain the address confidentiality program, and make referrals for protective orders. Protective orders are available to all victims of human trafficking under Texas Code Criminal Procedure 7A.01. Victims can apply, parents or guardians can apply, prosecuting attorneys can apply. Conviction or replacement on deferred can serve as reasonable grounds for the protective order findings. Victims can use pseudonyms, Texas Code Criminal Procedures 58.251 to 256. In 2021, extended to civil actions and testifying for legislature. Okay, going forward, the action plan, multidisciplinary collaboration, work across the state with LE and NGOs to collaborate. Consistency across the state with customized services for victims. Support MDT and care coordination teams. Victim-centered interdiction. Assess the services available in your area. Enhance internal and external knowledge and provide and attend HT training. Safeguarding victims' rights and access to crucial resources to support the victims who want pseudonyms or protective orders. All right, I think that's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris. As I mentioned, I'm Cara Pierce with the Texas Attorney General's Office, and I'm going to talk to you about the steps that we accomplished in 2021 towards the prosecute pillar. The strategic plan outlined 3 particular strategies that we should use from a prosecutorial perspective to improve the situation of human trafficking. The first strategy was we need to train prosecutors across the state about human trafficking cases and enlist experienced human trafficking prosecutors to work on cases. Human trafficking although human trafficking, the crime has been around a long time, there haven't been a lot of prosecutors who have focused on prosecuting these cases, and they do have some unique aspects. And so the Coordinating Council really wanted to focus on getting prosecutors interested in this topic and getting prosecutors trained in this topic so that when human trafficking occurs, it is identified and charged and prosecuted as trafficking. Second strategy is encouraging prosecutors to charge the strong criminal laws that we have here in Texas whenever possible. Our criminal laws are some of the strongest in the country. Life in prison is the high end of penalty ranges for human trafficking here in Texas, and we have a continuous trafficking statute where the minimum sentence is 25 years all the way up to life. And we want to make sure that when the facts warrant, those crimes are charged and that they are prosecuted to the fullest extent. And the third strategy is encouraging and fostering prosecution partnerships to improve successful outcomes. As I mentioned before, human trafficking cases have a lot of unique aspects, and so there are certain prosecutors' offices who don't have as many resources as might be required to prosecute the cases, and we want to make sure that everyone across the state has access to the resources they need. That includes trained prosecutors, victim advocates, criminal analysts. As you heard Chris mention, a lot of human trafficking involves social media and online aspects, and so we want to make sure that prosecutors around the state have access to all those services to make sure that they can prosecute these cases effectively.
There's blood on the bed, but here in
So
my head,
goals with regard to enlisting experienced human trafficking prosecutors. That just involves training. Texas has outstanding prosecutors that work in every DA's office, county attorney's office here in the state. They just don't all have the same experience or access to human trafficking training. And so that was one of the big goals of the Coordinating Council this year, was to establish and get people training when they wanted it. And the Texas AG's office has done a whole lot of trainings with that in mind this past year. Particularly, we put together 2 training started specifically for prosecutors, training about 120 Also, TDLR recognized the importance of human trafficking, and they hired some prosecutors to go
it's
the word
not
out
an
and make sure we're
emergency for
investigating
me.
what's not happening in the areas where
I
TB
look at the walls and they go clear. Cover my eyes and
As I mentioned before, the
disappear.
Texas legislature recognizes
Got a
this
new
is a big
heart,
problem.
I got a new heart, I got a
One of
new
the
heart, I
statistics,
got a new
while there aren't always
artificial
great
heart.
statistics that really encompass
It's not
the
a real
scope of the
heart,
problem
it's not a real heart, it's not a real heart, it is a real
one thing we
artificial
can use to
heart.
compare it is the number of calls made to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And since the National Human Trafficking Hotline's inception, Texas has consistently had the second highest number of calls reporting suspected trafficking in the country. And because of that, that's why we're here. That's why the Coordinating Council and the Trafficking Task Force exists, is to try to reduce that. Another way, the scope of the problem, during the last year, there were over 1.59 million acts of commercial
Pathological
shutdowns
monsters,
here in Texas
cried the
alone.
terrified
And of those, there
mathematician.
were over
Every one of
150,000
them a
average
splinter in
commercial
my eye. I hate the beat on the space in the coke curve. I fear the Cantor turner reset.
Those numbers
The
are down.
Sierpinski gasket makes me
In
wanna
2020,
cry.
there were 1.64 million on
And a million miles away,
223,000
a butterfly flapped its wings on a
So while
cold
the numbers are still
November
big,
day.
we're moving in the right direction.
A man named Benoit Mandelbrot was born.
We want to encourage prosecutors to charge these strong
Disdain for pure mathematics and his unique geometrical insights left him well equipped to face those demons down. He saw that infinite complexity could be described by simple rules. Used a giant brain and he turned the game around. Saw a vision in his head.
That required
All us
more
pointing
information
forward.
from people failing
Picked
out.
his pencil up and he wrote his secret
What
down.
prosecutors are seeing was that
Just take a point called T with a complex plane. C1 BZ squared plus C.
trafficker got arrested.
C2 is C1 squared plus C.
Required to bail out a trafficker.
C3 is C2 squared plus C. And so on. If the series of C's will always stay close to Z and never trend away. That point is in the Mandelbrot set. Mandelbrot set. You're a Rorschach test on fire. A D-glow pterodactyl. You're a heart-shaped box of springs and wire in one badass fucking fractal. And you're just in time to save the day. Sweeping all our fears away. You can change the world in a tiny way. Mandelbrot's in heaven. At least he will be when he's dead. Right now he's still alive and teaching math at Yale. Gave us order out of chaos. He gave us hope where there was none. His geometry succeeds where others fail. If you ever lose your way,
For child trafficking,
butterfly will flap its wings from a million miles
with regard
away.
to regular
Little
human trafficking,
miracle will come to take
there's
you
no law
home.
unless the state decides to waive
Just take a
that
point called T
aspect.
in the complex plane. C1 BZ squared plus C.
Also,
Z2 is Z1 squared plus C. Z3 is Z2 squared plus C. And so on. If the series of C's will always stay close to Z and never trend away. That point is in the Mandelbrot set. Mandelbrot set. You're a Rorschach test on fire. A D-glow pterodactyl. You're a heart-shaped box of springs and wire in one badass fucking fractal. And you're just in time to save the day. Sweeping all our fears away. You can change the world in a tiny way. And you're just in time to save the day. Sweeping all our fears away. You can change the world in a tiny way.
that tells me, that doesn't mean all of those were actually trafficking instances, but what that tells me is that the system is working, and that the systems that some of our partner agencies are putting into place are helping screen and identify potential trafficking. We also are encouraging and fostering prosecution partnerships. As I mentioned,
Get up early when the sleeping pill wakes me. Take a wake up pill to fill with energy. Power on hard and I check my messages, but I don't have any messages. I take a driving pill and head to my car. I drive around it because work isn't very far. I call my phone and I check my messages, but I don't have any messages. All I know, driving on drugs feels better when they're prescription. All I know, the world looks beautiful, the world looks so damn beautiful. I feel fantastic, and I never felt as good as how I do right now. Except for maybe when I think of how I felt that day, when I felt the way that I do right now. Right now, I feel fantastic, and I never felt as good as how I do right now. Except for maybe when I think of how I felt that day, when I felt the way that I do right now. Right now, right now.
Where we find illicit massage businesses.
Work is anything but quiet these days. I try to mitigate my concentration. I can see the day unfold in front of me, so I take the stairs and hit the gym. The phone is ringing when I get to my desk. Once the stinging's now a sharp pain in my chest, so I take a call and next and just chill. And then it's time for lunch again. All I know, work is easy when you don't stress out about deadlines. All I know is to take my medicine. I always take my medicine. I feel fantastic, and I never felt as good as how I do right now. Except for maybe when I think of how I felt that day, when I felt the way that I do right now. Right now, I feel fantastic, and I never felt as good as how I do right now. Except for maybe when I think of how I felt that day, when I felt the way that I do right now. Right now, right now, right now, right now, right now, right now, right now.
So we looked at various civil lawsuits that could be brought against traffickers. The Attorney General's office right now has a civil lawsuit pending against a Spanish immersion preschool where people came forward and said that they were being trafficked, as well as nuisance lawsuits, working with local municipalities for places that are
work is over, but I can't stay to work late. Gotta leave and get ready for my second date with a pretty girl that I met at the.
And as I mentioned, the landlord engagement program, where we're working with landlords to educate them about human trafficking and encourage them to take action to not allow that to happen in places where they own. And to summarize, with regard to our action plan, we are going to continue training law enforcement and prosecutors about human trafficking and continuing to reach out to them to offer our support through prosecution services, through the HT Blue Line. We're going to continue to encourage prosecutors to charge human trafficking whenever it's appropriate. And we're asking people to look at, are you charging trafficking? Are you charging it when we should charge it? And what are those outcomes? Also, the legislature requires all law enforcement and prosecutors in counties over 50,000 to report their human trafficking related arrests and prosecutions to the Attorney General's office so that we can get a better idea about the scope of the problem here in Texas. And so we're going to encourage those entities to give us that information because the data is only as good as what people give to us. So we're in the process of working on that right now so that hopefully we'll have good data going forward to see the scope of the problem. We're also encouraging and fostering prosecution partnerships to improve those outcomes. The Attorney General's office is working right now with multiple counties on human trafficking cases around the state. And we plan to continue to do that and just build those relationships to support prosecutors throughout Texas. And now I believe I'm going to turn it over to Todd.
Thanks, Cara. So I'm going to be covering some of the strategies around the provide support component of the strategic plan. I'm not going to read all of these because we'll dive into each of these strategies in just a moment. But as you can see, it is a pretty long list, and I think that's a reflection of the fact that there is a sense of urgency in terms of making sure that survivors in our state have the access and support to services that they need. That was a pretty clear charge from the legislature, frankly, when they created our team in the governor's office several years ago, but also in revamping the task force with the creation of the coordinating council as well. So we'll jump right in to the first strategy around training stakeholders. We know that there are a number of victims that are hiding in plain sight that are out in our communities, and we want to proactively identify survivors earlier and more often. And once they are identified, we want to be sure that they have access to the services that they need. And there's a lot of research that indicates individuals being exploited are exploited for multiple years before they're ever identified, especially youth are unlikely to disclose or even self-identify as victims. So it's incumbent on us to proactively identify. One of the strategies we've been rolling out is supporting validated screening tools. In order to do that, there's a tool called the See It that you see here that is just an example of one tool. It stands for Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool. The governor's office has chosen this tool as a primary method for screening. Victim service grantees around the state that have grants from our office are utilizing this tool. TJJD has supported probation offices around the state in utilizing this tool, and DFPS is also utilizing it with some high-risk youth in their system. And since its implementation, there have been over 55,000 screenings done in the state of Texas. Not all unique youth, because we do occasionally have rescreens of youth, but over 55,000 screenings that have taken place. And the tool will tell you whether there is no concern or not enough information, a possible concern of exploitation, or a clear concern for trafficking or exploitation. And 7,000 of those have scored a clear concern, which is about in line with what we would expect from the research and the validation of the tool. And that's important because it tells us that next steps are needed and those youth qualify for specialized services that are available around the state. On the next slide, also in line with information about training, Brandy with HHSC mentioned earlier House Bill 2059 from a couple sessions ago that had to do with healthcare practitioner training. And she talked about finding information about those approved trainings through the Human Trafficking Resource Center. But HHSC also developed its own training to meet this requirement, especially with folks that have contracts with HHSC, and that's called the HEART training, and that finally launched in November of 2021. And I understand there have been 10,000 folks that have already been trained in the HEART curriculum since it became available in November. It does meet that statutory requirement, and it is available free of charge. And you can find more information about that and all of the healthcare training requirements through the Human Trafficking Resource Center at HHSC. Also in line with victim identification, the Texas Workforce Commission has been a really key partner in the work of the Coordinating Council, especially in the realm of labor trafficking. There can be, as you can imagine, kind of a fine line between just generally exploitative labor practices and actual labor trafficking, but we want to be sure that all of those have been addressed. But throughout Workforce Solutions and Workforce Development Boards, TWC has migrant and seasonal farm work outreach programs available, and they have really incorporated human trafficking and other training into that outreach program. We know that migrant and seasonal farm workers are a high-risk population for potential trafficking. The McCain Institute to Combat Trafficking actually had multi-year grants in West and South Texas that help to identify these as particularly vulnerable populations for labor trafficking. And so TWC has been doing their part to make sure in those outreach programs that they're providing access to resources, literature, and support in order to help those workers who may be at risk for exploitation. Another key strategy from the Coordinating Council is ensuring that we have a continuum of care that's available throughout the state. So that means, from initial identification, immediate services, and long-term services, what does that continuum look like, and are there gaps in certain regions? And one of the things that we have done from the Office of the Governor to fulfill that charge for children and youth is to launch a system that we call care coordination. And that's basically a multidisciplinary team of stakeholders that comes together once a victim is identified to collaboratively facilitate the plan for that child and make sure that no needs fall through the cracks. Happy to report that at this point, we have 15 care coordination teams that are up and running around the state. You can see them reflected there. 14 of those 15 are actually facilitated by children's advocacy centers. I'll touch on that later, but our CACs have been a critical partner in helping to facilitate this process. The one outlier is Harris County. That is not a CAC. There's a county agency there in Harris County that's filling that role, but the CAC continues to be a critical partner in Harris County as well. Next slide. Is to that same point and really addressing the fact that we have to leverage existing systems in order to do this. We can't build entirely new systems to respond to this problem. I already talked about leveraging our network of CACs, but we're also working with other members of the council and statewide agencies, for example, for children, DFPS and TJJD. We know that there are children presenting to our systems, presenting to these agencies that may have victimization in their past. And so we want to work collaboratively to provide training and technical assistance to partners within those systems so that they can better identify and respond to children that they may already be serving that are at risk or that have been exploited and trafficked. And you can see there are a number of agencies that we're also partnering with to provide some of that training. The second point there is across the coordinating council, there have been efforts to focus on care coordination basically for adults. So our charge in the child sex trafficking team and the statute really is to come up with a plan for facilitating services for child victims of sex trafficking, but it's been identified as a gap in our state to do something similar for adults as well. And so this collaborative group called the State Adult Services Project is looking at the lessons that we've learned in providing these services for youth and seeing how we can come up with a plan to provide similar services for adults. Again, looking at the continuum of care and training, the Human Trafficking Resource Center that I mentioned earlier around training has partnered with the Department of Labor, and they've actually come up with a protocol to refer workers to the Department of Labor if they've experienced unfair wage practices and need resources. So again, looking at any opportunity that we have to leverage existing supports and identify those most vulnerable populations and how we can support each other in providing resources to those populations. In conjunction with training, we want to be sure that the training that's provided is quality, but that it also focuses on trauma-informed practices for survivors. We want to be sure that as folks are trained on the issue of trafficking, that's done with a survivor-informed lens, and it's done in a way that's not going to re-exploit or re-traumatize survivors as we engage with them. The Attorney General's Office had in the past and is looking again this year at a survivor panel during National Crime Victims' Rights Week, which I believe is in April, and is going to be replacing some of the in-person activity we weren't able to have in January this year. The governor's office has also looked at what are sort of foundational training components as we build capacity for providers around the state. What are the key training elements that they need to have? And also, if you are providing specialized services, what kind of evaluation should be taking place within those services? So there are a number of tools that are out there. We're looking at a tool from RTI right now that looks at outcomes for trafficking survivors. That is not unique to children. It's a tool that's appropriate for adults. It's actually free. It's open source, available on the RTI website. But we want to look at that and other tools and see how they might help us do a better job at evaluating outcomes. I would also highlight, since this does mention the survivor panel and being survivor informed, that we have a Survivor Leaders Council in our state, and they were actually really key in terms of reviewing all of the components of this strategic plan, providing input to help refine some pieces of this strategic plan to be sure, again, that we have that survivor-informed perspective in all of our strategies. Specialized advocacy and case management programs. We recognize that there is a need for some specialized services and not just building capacity in existing services for this population. So one of the key ones that you see there that is new as a result of the efforts of this group are what we call CSA advocacy. That's commercially sexually exploited youth advocacy programs. These are really specialized advocacy and case management programs that provide a 24/7 response to children and youth that have been exploited. The majority of these are in operation through grants from our office and the Office of the Governor. Happy to report that these services are currently available in over 100 counties. We know that that's only just under half of all Texas counties. We have 254. But it does actually represent just over 80% of the state's population. So in some really critical places around the state. And last fiscal year, those agencies were able to provide services to over 5,000 children and youth survivors of sexual exploitation. TABC is also looking at how they can enhance their victim service abilities through their agency, identifying more and more victims through their work, especially in bars and cantinas and restaurants. They've actually added a new role in their agency of a victim service coordinator. Our office was actually able to help fund initially the creation of that program, and hopefully that becomes something that's sustainable. I think I actually saw TAB staff and Rachel on the line specifically, and it's been really critical for them to be able to marry this victim service component to the great investigative work that they're already doing. And of course, they continue to partner with nonprofit service providers on the ground to support that as well. Again, in terms of services, we talked about building capacity, specialized services, but really making sure that there's a variety of services available. It has to be a comprehensive continuum, not just a one-size-fits-all model in order to meet the needs of survivors. A few key things that have happened with the Coordinating Council. Our office has partnered with the Texas Workforce Commission as well as the Texas Workforce Investment Council to launch a pilot project. And actually this just came to fruition this month, hot off the press. You can find a press release about this pilot project, but really to look at in a few select locations, how we can better support through our Workforce Commission, those young youth and young adult survivors of sex trafficking. We have recognized through conversations in the Coordinating Council that really that access to meaningful employment and that economic vulnerability is a key risk factor, both for entering a life of exploitation in the first place, but also having the ability to exit that exploitation. And so through a combination of training and employment navigators through these systems, partnering with some of those CSA advocacy programs that I mentioned earlier, we're hopeful that we'll be able to provide better support to these youth survivors as they try to walk their way through the workforce process. I already mentioned the migrant and seasonal farm worker outreach programs through TWC, but again, that has been a critical component of meeting the individualized needs, especially for potential labor trafficking victims in that population. Again, we already touched on this. It's not only important to implement services, but also to evaluate them. I touched on that tool from RTI as just one potential tool. There are others out there, always looking to continuously improve the services that we provide, not just from our grantees, but from all providers around the state. DFPS has also been a key partner in looking at effectiveness, particularly as we try to build capacity around the state for residential and other services for youth survivors. So we have collaboratively launched with DFPS as well as the Texas Alliance for Child and Family Studies, for the Texas Network of Youth Service, some multidisciplinary working groups. And one of those working groups is looking particularly at how we evaluate services. Again, one of the key strategies and gaps has been funding. We have been really fortunate, actually, a couple sessions ago, I think every agency that had a legislative appropriation request specific to trafficking actually got funding related to that request. That's part of the reason the Coordinating Council came to exist in the first place, because we wanted to be sure that we were collaborating on how we were using that funding. Another part of that is looking at braided funding, not just relying completely on one source or one grant source for all funding related to this issue. So I mentioned previously some of those work groups that have come together as part of our efforts to build capacity. One of those work groups is looking specifically at what funding streams and braided funding looks like for building capacity around the state. Looking at care coordination, I touched on this earlier. You saw the map of our 15 care coordination teams around the state. Again, the CACs have been a critical partner in that due to their expertise and history of convening multidisciplinary teams, also their protections in the family code to share information, to develop protocols with one another. Again, you can see this is constantly evolving. This says 13 because just before this presentation, 2 more regions launched, so now we're up to 15 locations with care coordination across the state. This is just building on that a little bit more. It just kind of shows you sort of a sample flow chart of some of the work that these care coordination teams do. It's going to be important in order to enter care coordination that you have some type of open DFPS or law enforcement investigation just to get in the door, since the CACs are that primary partner. But they are helping to ensure that those immediate urgent needs are met. Advocates are a key part of that, being dispatched as well in those crisis situations with law enforcement recoveries. But that moves in to less immediate urgent needs and all the way into long-term support. So that's something that makes this model fairly different. It's not just a response in that immediate crisis, but it is an ongoing long-term support to make sure that that youth survivor has what they need in order to heal and to thrive. Barriers to information sharing is something that came up regularly as a complication and a challenge, and that could be information sharing among service providers, among state agencies, among law enforcement operations. So that is going to continue to be an area that the Coordinating Council looks at. But a few things that we have done from our office, we have worked with Allies Against Slavery and their Lighthouse platform to aggregate and visualize some of those different data sources together. In April of last year, DFPS updated some of their human trafficking policies, both for CPS and for child protective investigations. And through that process, they were able to standardize some of those processes statewide. They were able to streamline and strengthen how a child, for example, that is in DFPS conservatorship may be able to access the care coordination services that we talked about earlier, as well as CSA advocacy. So again, making sure that what we're building, there's some uniformity available statewide. It's not that you have a different response and access to services if you are in Houston compared to El Paso, for example. Next slide. You can see here, just as we wrap up, there is so much going on in this space of providing support that this is just a repeat of some of the strategies that we had earlier. There are too many steps and actions being taken in order to reflect all of them here. We will continue some of the activities that I talked about during this section of the presentation. A couple others that I wanted to highlight that I know the person speaking after me, Mary Winston with TDLR, they got some training rolling out for law enforcement partners. Actually, I believe that was happening this month, so it may have even already happened. HHSC has been working on implementation of House Bill 2633. We heard about the license plate in that new account earlier. And so there are immediate actions that are taking place right now to give fruit to some of those processes. And we will continue taking action on each of these strategies as we outline during the course of this presentation. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to the final sort of pillar of our presentation and hand things over to Mary Winston.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Winston. I'm an attorney with TDLR, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. I have the honor of managing my agency's anti-trafficking unit and representing my agency as a member of the Coordinating Council. The Council's strategic plan is our charge from the legislature, but it is also a very personal mission for all of us. Today, we've already provided an overview of the first 4 of our 5 strategic plan pillars that we utilize to assist in the eradication of human trafficking in Texas. Our efforts consist of coordination and collaboration of programs, services, and state resources. This is the epitome of our 5th pillar, we partner. First, we invest in building expertise to drive policy and practice. How do we do this? By education. One of my favorite quotes comes from Helen Keller, and it is, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." That's so simple, right? Through our Texas Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force, next slide, we have been able to reach all corners of the state, eradicating trafficking by educating and on trafficking related subjects that include legislative updates and information for underserved populations, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We also join forces with local, state, and federal agencies who are boots on the ground and eyes and ears in all aspects of the trafficking world. For this strategic plan to be successful, we need data. The Office of the Governor provided grant funding for Lighthouse, a powerhouse data gatherer or aggregator that assists by being a clearinghouse so we can visualize the data of where trafficking is occurring in our state and where we can be most effective. Where does Lighthouse get this data? Next slide. From various law enforcement agencies. One of those agencies includes the City of Dallas, as well as the Dallas Police Department. Working with Health and Human Services, an ongoing study by this group, or these groups, will be made available early next year. They analyze the prevalence of sex trafficking crimes in their area, and they work on strategies for reducing the number of those crimes, indicating the city's need for additional funding for prevention programs and initiatives. Next slide. Other partners include one of our great advocates in the fight against human trafficking, State Representative Ann Johnson of Houston. Also, various state agencies, to name a few, the Texas Department of Information Resources, the Texas Comptroller's Office, the Office of the Governor, Department of Family Protective Services, Department of Motor Vehicles, and Department of Public Services. Safety. These amazing groups have worked together to create a donation account and multiple funding streams that provide dedicated housing and treatment services to youth who have been negatively impacted and who have fallen victim to trafficking. TDLR has partnered with over 65 law enforcement agencies within Texas and has increased its risk-based inspectors for both illicit massage businesses and licensed massage establishments who are at risk for trafficking. We all know that human trafficking not only includes sex trafficking, but also labor trafficking. In this vein, we've partnered with the Department of Labor to bring awareness and to provide direction for filing reports for labor trafficking in your area. Both TDLR and the Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission have come together and partnered with the Department of Homeland Security's localized trafficking units. We want to make sure that everyone is also aware that human trafficking offenses must be reported to the Office of Attorney General. The next facet of partnership is to encourage the growth of public-private partnerships. Our governor's office has led this charge by providing strategic and technical support to the Secretary of State's Businesses Against Trafficking. The Office of the Governor has also engaged Rotary International and Austin 20 to support stabilization and assessment centers in various areas throughout Texas. They've also engaged the Jensen Project to support the Human Trafficking Survivor Leadership Council. The Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission also fosters public-private partnerships. This initiative, by partnering with other agencies and NGOs or non-governmental organizations to stay on top of resource availability. TABC's NGO collaboration has included Refugee Services of Texas, YMCA, Unbound, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. HHSC has partnered with the following authors of this great article: Dr. Jessica L. Peck, Dr. Jordan Greenbaum, Dr. Hani Stoklosa, on their Journal of Human Trafficking article, Mandated Continuing Education Requirements for Healthcare Professional State Licensure, the Texas Model. So we reach into the academic level as well. Finally, the Office of Attorney General has partnered with the private hospitality community to develop signs, establish training criteria, and training for commercial lodging establishments. All of these pillars are part of the Human Trafficking Coordinating Council's strategic plan to fight human trafficking. We look forward to utilizing all 5 pillars as we go forth to work together to eradicate human trafficking in Texas. That's part of our plan and part of the implementation process. Thank you. Cara?
Thank you very much to all my coordinating council members who are attending and who spoke here today to discuss our progress on implementing our strategies to help eradicate human trafficking here in Texas. I did see some questions pop up on the chat, and if you have any others, please go ahead and put those in there. And Tricia or Isabel, if you want to ask any questions that haven't been answered, and the panelists will be happy to try to address those.
Sure. So our first question comes from Crystal Garcia. She had a question about iWatch, and she wants to know, is iWatch being used in place of the National Human Trafficking Hotline?
Crystal, that's a great question. The answer is yes and no, because it can't just be an easy answer. The Texas legislature this past session dictated that Texas iWatch would take over the portion of the tips, like law enforcement investigative tips, that were going to the national hotline, but that the national hotline was still going to provide victim services. So if someone wants to report possible human trafficking, that should be done now through the iWatch website or phone number. But if you're trying to find out about victim services available in your area, or if you're a victim looking for services, the national hotline is still the best source to do that for Texas.
Great, thank you for that. Our next question comes from Tonya. She has served as a victim advocate in the past. And so her question was, how does someone become a Texas victim advocate?
I don't know, Todd, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Hi. Yeah, I think there's some nuances in there because we do have different types of advocates. Obviously, we have advocates that are embedded in law enforcement agencies that are actually funded and paid for by those agencies, whether it's a DA's office or Department of Public Safety has a number of victim advocates around the state. We also have sexual assault advocates that may be providing services to adults that have been victims. And there is a particular certification and training program through the AG's office that would relate to that. Our CSA advocacy programs that I talked about earlier, you can find more information on our website, and I can plug that into the chat, but really they're not on an individual basis. They're actually facilitated through nonprofit agencies that we have grants to, and that allows us to ensure certain minimum standards, some monitoring to make sure that we have abuse risk management in place, as well as best practices for services. So any of those opportunities to actually be employed in that role would actually be jobs directly hired by those agencies, and you can see a list of the agencies and which counties they serve on our website. So those are kind of 3 different potential advocacy roles that might be relevant. And for the CSA advocates in particular, I'll plug in our website in the chat where you can see a list of some of those programs.
Great, thank you, Todd. Isabel, do we have any others?
Yes, we just had one new one pop up in the chat from Mila. She's asking, how can we formally partner for providing training for interpreters? She says they have training on trauma-informed interpreting for survivors that they've been delivering for the last several years. But if anyone could speak to how to formally partner for training, that would be awesome.
I remember you from our last webinar that I was on, Mila, and I was very excited to hear that you had this going on. I'm not sure what, you can definitely get us your information and we can spread it out throughout the task force. With regard to formal partnerships, I don't know, what coordinating council, what are your thoughts? I may have to go to Mary since she talked about partners. Do you have any ideas about formal partnerships, how we get those going?
Maybe we can schedule a call for that so we can show you what we have, and you guys can then decide. We just want to make it available. We've been offering it for free for participating members of various organizations. So if we can schedule a call, we would love to offer that training.
Emil, we'll definitely send us your email. I think we probably already have it in the chat, but send us your email and we'll circle up and we'll try to set something like that up, because I know we're always interested and we always have need for interpreters, and it's great if they're trauma informed and if they know what they're walking into as far as what they're going to be interpreting. I think that's great.
We would love for more information on that. Thank you so much.
So I will reach out to the email that was provided for requesting a copy of the presentation and ask to schedule a meeting with you guys.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I did one more thing from HHSC. I don't know if this is speaks to what you are requesting, Mila, but I'm going to stick a link in the chat for HHS Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services, which includes some interpretation stuff. So poke around on there, and then I'd be happy to join you all on that meeting, the future meeting. I'm about to put it in the chat. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for chiming in on that one. We have another question about partnership from Lisa Tomlinson. She would like to know about partnering with local juvenile and adult probation departments. Do any coordinating council members, do you know of any active partnerships that are going on in those areas, or something you have planned for the future?
We regularly work with the state level of that. And in my old job, when I was a federal prosecutor in Dallas, I worked with local ones for sure. As far as the coordinating council, I think some of that might be, would that be through the governor's office, Todd? Do you all have some partnerships?
Sorry, I lost the very last part of that, specifically with probation departments.
Yes, with juvenile probation, like local juvenile probation. And what partnerships do we have with them?
we have not done a much on the adult side, just given our charge, but on the juvenile side, yes, absolutely. I mean, as care coordination is being developed in different regions, juvenile probation often is at the table for that so that they know what services are available to support kids that might be identified. And then we've actually been doing a lot of work statewide with the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, specifically their regionalization team, really utilizing them as the primary resource for the local probation departments. So we've been pushing a lot of stuff out through TJJD that way. Specifically, they've done a ton of heavy lifting at actually embedding that screening tool that I talked about earlier within the platform that many juvenile justice departments are using. And so there's a lot of training going on around proactive identification with the See It tool, and a lot of counties that have come on board with that. But then also with respect to services, we have a handful of grantees that are providing some specialized services through juvenile justice systems, but then are also just at the table learning about what supportive resources are there in the continuum in their region. Not sure if that answers the question, but.
We have any other questions pending, Isabel?
Nope, that was it. That's all the questions I saw in the chat, except for a few people asking about receiving the slides. So I will once again put in the email that you can send us an email if you would like a PowerPoint copy of the slides from today. So I will put that in the chat one more time. And if anyone has any final questions, please go ahead and put those in there now.
Also, thank you so much for your interest in this and your participation in this webinar. And please reach out to us if you have questions. If there's anything we can do to help with training, any partnership opportunities that we may have with you and your organizations. And please follow our social media. It's new. I know I feel like we're a little bit behind getting on the social media trend, but we want to follow us on social media, and we want to follow your organizations on social media to keep us in touch. And we want this to be another great way to get out information and to highlight good work that you all are doing. If you are part of an organization that is not yet a member or affiliate of the Statewide Trafficking Task Force, please reach out to us if you're interested in affiliating. The task force is a great group, and we have working groups within the task force where you might be able to meet and network with other people that work in your general field around the state. And so we're really hoping to continue to grow the task force to make sure all areas of work and all areas of Texas are represented in there. So please contact us at the email you see on your screen now if you're interested in learning more about the task force. And I guess that's all I have. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to be with us here today and to participate. And we just look forward to a great 2022, and we're going to do another one of these next year, and I bet we'll have a lot more great things to report.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. So happy to be part of this.
Recording stopped.